Yeah, the first tip and the first advice I give is communicate with your family. That is actually the most important one because sometimes we leave them out when we're talking finances. I know it's hard to do, but you got to tell them, listen, this is what might happen. So we need to start saving. We need to start cutting back. Remember that you're not defined by your job. You're defined by who you are. And your family is the most important thing in supporting your family. You're a pilot, but you're also a person. And if you have to take another job, just hustle and do that. And I know one thing in every industry downturn, no matter what it's been in, I was in the computer industry, I was in international trade. Both of those industries had downturns. And when you're in the top 10%, you'll probably wind up getting a job. So put yourself in that top 10%. Get another rating if you can, study, etc. But yeah, the biggest thing is communicate and then start cutting back now. Do it now. Don't wait till you get furloughed because then you're in a habit pattern, right? And so if the furlough happens, you're already there.
Today on the show, we're joined by Valeri, a former ALPA Furlough Rep. Carl explains how furloughs work, how long they last, and how to prepare for them. Then, Rob Alston from Harvey Watt Insurance calls in to discuss how leaves of absence, furloughs, and layoffs can affect pilot insurance coverage.
You're on 121.5, the emergency frequency.
Welcome to the 21.5 Show, a podcast for professional pilots by professional pilots. Join Dylan and Max, both with experience in flight instruction, the airlines, and business aviation, as they talk to a variety of industry experts, share stories, and have a little fun along the way.
City to city, coast to coast, and around the world.
And around the country.
And around the country.
Professional pilots.
We have a professional broadcaster joining us today, so I'm really trying to tune up the pipes.
Yeah, you should. It's he sets the bar high. Let's just say that.
Exactly. So I'm just working on my game. I've got like some inspiration. So we've got a great interview with Valeri coming up. Welcome to the 21.5 Show. It is the podcast for professional pilots.
It's Max and Dylan, as usual. Here providing more uplifting news in the aviation industry here in May of 2020.
Yeah. We're kicking off the month with some bad news. We saw over the weekend United Airlines sending out a big list of displacements. So it's kind of the first real big shoe to drop. You know, it was funny. It reminded me of kind of the first shoe that dropped in this whole thing, which was when United canceled that class. Remember that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's right.
And we're like, oh, can't believe they canceled that class. And they did that to those new hires. And that seems like a long time ago.
It does. When that seemed like a lot bigger deal then than now. And
now it's like,
of course, the headline is, United to furlough thousands of pilots, which that's not what this is. Let's be clear. It's a displacement bid. Is it encouraging? No, but no furloughs have been announced by United Airlines, at least. And I'm just going to have to see what happens. I mean, on the encouraging side, like we were talking about, the TSA, though, has noticed an increase in passengers every day for the last week, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Numbers are trending in the right direction. So that's good. I think
people are fed up, man. They're tired of this quarantine.
Yeah.
Exactly. Irregardless of your personal feelings about it, everyone's just tired of being cooped up and not going anywhere. And so I'm confident that there's some pent up demand there. And
for sure. Plus the prices are
restrictions ease. Yeah, the prices are right. The airlines can afford to price the tickets because one of their largest costs being oil is so low. Or fuel, I should say. And I don't know. I'm still cautiously optimistic.
Here's something interesting on more of the business aviation side. Flight safety is furloughing a bunch of instructors. And I think this is really interesting because I go to training every summer. And I feel like everyone that's kind of going to training in the next few months is waiting probably until the end of the summer, kind of fall, to go to school. And it's not like training is this optional thing that we can do and we cut it out of our budget when we can't afford it or whatever. It's like we got to go if we want to fly. So it's interesting that flight safety is furloughing a bunch of instructors. There was already kind of an instructor shortage. There's still got to be a ton of pilots that have to go get training. I don't know how that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting thing too. I thought that too, because you would think that would lag behind the rest of the industry because the training only takes place once or twice a year, depending on who you are. So it wouldn't be as immediately felt, but I don't know. They're the tip of the spear. Maybe it has something to do with Warren Buffett's dumping all of his airline positions, since that's a Berkshire Hathaway company.
Yeah, I did see that in the news. Well, we have a bunch of those stories that we recorded. We had an episode already of feel good stories. We have a part 2 in the can. We might have to release
we might have to do an emergency release of that just for morale.
So we'll continue to track this. I think that really, though, the word I would say is you can see some big displacement numbers, but I would not translate that into, if there's 5,000 pilots getting displaced, there's 5,000 pilots getting furloughed. I do not think that that's going to correlate. So I think you got to hold your horses on that.
It's interesting. And then we read some communication from American Airlines that was sent to us, and they basically had all these bullet points of all of this stuff. And one of the things is they're like, well, we've not discussed furloughs like United and Southwest and all these other companies. And so that letter was really confusing and mysterious, I thought, because they really didn't say anything. And then Southwest then released that they're going to go they're about at 1,400 flights, down from over 4,000 a day. In June, they're going to go up to 2,000 flights a day. And basically at the end of June, they're going to ramp up and end up with 2,400 flights a day. So I don't know what they see. I know they said bookings are up for June and July. I think everybody's experienced airplanes that are booked to a certain amount, and of that amount, not very many show up for the flight. So who knows? But there's little snippets of encouraging news here and there.
Good and bad. And you wonder, these displacement announcements and other things, is that going to be leverage for possible contract negotiation?
Oh, I'm sure. And I think, I mean, all of this is leverage. It's a business. And that's people that get pissed at the company for that kind of stuff is baseless, because they are, in fact, running a business. It's not a charity. And who knows? Like we discussed before, with American and their liquidity and debt obligations, may be the first and fairly rapidly to go into bankruptcy, which, again, long-term could be the greatest thing. Everyone's going to do what's best for them.
Let's stop trying to prognosticate and predict the future. But dig into the mailbag. We have a couple of items. What do you see in there?
This was one of my favorite stories. This guy, seriously, on Pro Pilot World, he goes, ha, 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 great episode. The story about the Russians stealing the MD-87 had me on the edge of my seat and laughing at times. What a story. Unreal. Thanks for the needed distraction, gents. So that's one of my favorites, man. I mean, when he came to and called the, what's it called? The phone number called the Airport Secure or whatever?
The GA Secure line.
GA Secure. We didn't realize you were such a powerful man in the United States. That's so great.
That was the stories episode we ran a few back. If you haven't had a chance to listen to that, go back. And if you're looking to feel better, and then we'll have part 2 of that coming up here real soon. So I don't know, Max, you're not super active on social media. This thing had to have been sent to us a million times. This was the house airport codes thing. Did anyone send that to you? It's like, I'm
sure they did. I just am not aware of it.
And so now referring to my living room as LVR.
Oh, you know what? I did see that. Yeah, I did see
Probably
that.
20 listeners sent that to us. So that was
made the rounds.
Yeah. Here was another good one too that a listener sent to us. It said, if you could end COVID-19 by sacrificing one airport, which airport would you choose and why LaGuardia? Have you flown in there since I think they redid one of the terminals there.
No, I haven't been to LaGuardia in quite some time.
Lot of questions about the 401k stuff from our previous episode and our conversation with Grayson on investing. So we put some of that stuff up on social media, and I got a ton of questions about it, especially kind of specific questions like, oh, I'm a pilot at X major airline. Is this retirement, the target date retirement fund, is it as bad as you guys are saying? And, things that I really can't answer because I don't have the access to the information. So we ended up writing a blog post about this, and it's on our website, 215podcast.com. And if you just click on blog, you'll see the blog post. I'll have a link in the show notes as well. And we basically break it down and teach you how to read the fees and understand like, well, okay, the fee is this, but is that good or bad? And so we kind of give you some average fees and help you understand if the fee is high or low. And then we also presented some alternative options, kind of what a lot of people, including we mentioned him earlier in the show, Warren Buffett. He actually has a recommendation on what you should do for your 401k. It's actually extremely simple, and I do it myself, and it reduced the fees in my portfolio by about 90+%. So that's all up on the blog post, and you can check it out.
Yeah, that blog post is super interesting. If you guys have any other questions as it relates to finance and things that our guy Grayson could potentially answer, send them in and we will get him on the phone again and fire off those questions for a mini segment in a episode in the near future.
Yeah, because we dropped the ball on a really big one that a few listeners pointed out, which is what should I do with all my 401ks from my previous employer? So we're going to get them on the phone, and then
I'm sure that's not the only thing we missed. So whatever you guys have, please send them in over the next week or two, and we'll get those answered.
So Max, one last item in the mailbag. I'm very happy to report all of the feedback from the listeners was that they like our intro music.
Really?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I wouldn't say like it was like thousands of emails, but all of the messages we did receive said, keep the music. We like it. And somebody also
their propensity for head bobbing with the music.
Yes. I was just going to say somebody actually did say that they did some head bobbing. So
yes, I knew I wasn't alone.
There you have it.
Boom.
Yeah. Boom. Okay. Well, coming up on today's show, Max, we've got real actual professional aviation broadcasters joining us. So at least there will be one on the show.
I know. He sounds so much better than we do.
Yeah, I know. So we got to practice. So we've got some goals. But Carl Valeri, he's the host of the Aviation Careers podcast and the Stuck Mike AvCast, is going to be joining us and really breaking down furloughs. He's got a lot of information. He was a representative for the union at an airline, the furlough representative. So he's really used to walking pilots through kind of the motions of the furlough. So tons of great information with Carl. Then after that, we're going to touch base with our old buddy, Rob Alston at Harvey Watt. He has some good information about loss of license and insurance plans that you might have. And what happens if you lose your current job or switching jobs, kind of explaining how those policy works when you're in a transitional period. So
good stuff. Well, let's get right to it. Here's Carl.
All right, Max, today on the show, we're joined by Carl Valeri. He's a career coach, podcast host, airline pilot, and probably not a champion sleeper, I would imagine. He sounds like a pretty busy guy.
So welcome to the show, Carl.
Well, thanks so much. Actually, I didn't get much sleep last night, as you say.
I can imagine this is a really busy time, Carl. We'd love for you to just introduce yourself a little bit, give us a little bit about your vast background, just so the listeners can kind of understand what you're up to.
Sure. I'm actually airline pilot, like you said. I do that pretty much part-time. I drop most of my trips so I can do the podcasting and the career coaching, and very much involved in social media. I have two podcasts, Aviation Careers podcast, where obviously we talk about careers from everything mechanics, pilots, flight attendants, corporate pilots, airline pilots, everything there. And then we go on to Stuck Mike AvCast, which is a totally different format. And that's for people that just love general aviation. So I'm still into general aviation. I got a little Piper Cherokee that I fly around. And because of that, I really got involved with Sun and Fun Radio, and I co-chair the radio station at Sun and Fun. And career coaching, I guess I'll mention the career coaching. That's part of our thing, is that we do the thing that I'm busiest with right now is career coaching. And most people, though, I think know us for our scholarships guide. We publish the largest scholarships guide for aerospace out there, for everything, again, from flight attendants, management, EMTs, people that are in flight, EMTs, that kind of thing, flight nurses, airline pilots, people that want to get type ratings or instrument ratings, want to get aerobatic training and that type of thing, for people of all ages and all types and different countries too.
That's really great. You know, I serve on the committee for an aviation scholarship for our local Business Aviation Association. And the hardest thing for us, we only award to residents of Arizona. That's part of our deal. But the hardest thing in general is raising awareness for applicants, because there is money out there to give away, but a lot of times students and not even just students, but people in industry just aren't aware of it. So we appreciate your efforts to raise awareness.
Thanks. And that's why we did it, is because we were dealing with folks that said, hey, listen, we can't find applicants. And I said, well, there's got to be a guide out there. And I couldn't find one. So I decided to do it. And it's been, I can get into a little bit of history of it, but it's been a real challenge for me, because a very emotional thing, because it's something that helps people. And that's really important to me, is helping other people. Obviously I did in the past life, I was the ALPA rep for the furlough people, but just a quick history on that. I started this years ago with my mom, used to help put scholarships together and also help with people that were applying to college. And I said, hey, I think I could do this. I think I could do a scholarships guide for aerospace. And she says, great. Took us years. We started putting it together. And about 3 months prior to publishing, she passed away. So unfortunately, she was my biggest critic, actually, about the scholarships guide. There was always something wrong with it. And so to this day, it'll never be good enough for my mom. And I'm hoping she's proud of it. She never got to see the final product, but it truly has grown. So that is actually kind of my motivation, is towards making this a better product every day.
That's a great story.
Thanks.
Well, Carl, we thought it'd be great just to kind of start off with a little overview of the landscape of the industry, especially the pilot job market. You're in touch with clients all over the industry, people coming to you for advice and help. So can you just give us a brief overview of what you've seen in the last 3 or 4 weeks?
Sure. And it's not just in America, it's worldwide, where things have changed quite a bit. For those that listen to the podcast, Aviation Careers, I do talk about the careers being like musical chairs. And when the music stops, that's when the people that aren't sitting don't have a job. And the music just stopped. And that's where we are right now. And
that's funny.
It's funny, but it's also sad.
Well, we've related to the exact same way as we say, when the music stops, you better be comfortable in your chair that you're at, because
But here's the thing that I think people make the same mistake. And I've been through many furloughs. I've been through 9/11, SARS, and many different downturns. And one of the things, this is similar, but it's not. Every different furlough, everything is different about this, just like every other one was different. The thing that's happening right now, talking about furloughs, we're talking about layoffs and that type of thing. Currently in the industry, you're seeing, we went from bonuses to people going to the airlines, to class dates that are getting canceled, to hiring freezes, to training freezes. And there isn't an hour that goes away that I don't get an email from a client saying, hey, listen, I either lost my job, or I'm frozen in training, or I'm afraid to lose my job. And right now, currently, this, and I've always said this, when we see a normal furlough, we're looking at 10 to 20% of the pilot group. In this, if this turns out the way it could, we'd have more than that. But the most important thing is the mitigation of furloughs. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But as far as the landscape is right now, we've never seen this big of a shutdown for this long. And my advice is always, if they say it's going to be shut down for 6 months, double that. It's probably about a year. And I was just working with a client last night. Their regional said we're freezing training for 2 months. I can't mention the airline, but they just said it's going to be 12 months. Is they're expecting for them to come back. So things are okay. So they're bad right now, but here's the problem. And this is the one thing I've seen over and over with every single furlough, is people stop flying. In other words, they say, I got into this, I heard there were going to be 6-figure incomes, and there isn't, so I'm going to stop flying. But the problem is, if you want to do this as a career and it's not just a job, then you need to keep with it. You need to stick with your flying, because when they start hiring again, now you're going to be up against all those people that had been been flying and building hours. So I've said this over and over again, and I've worked on committees where we brought people back to the airlines, and those people got terminated when they came back, amazingly enough, after furlough. Now, why is that? Because a lot of people feel the airline has to keep them current and flying. Well, they do while you're working for them, but not while you're on furlough. And that's the biggest mistake people make. So what's the advice there? Keep current, keep flying, keep moving forward in your career. But the most important thing is keep your family fed and safe, and then you go from there. You have to really prioritize in life. And I get it. There's people that just can't go back to flying because they need a job. They need to do something. And for those people, I say try to do something small. Get in front of any type of a simulator, read books, go out, ask friends if you can go flying, that type of thing. But as far as the landscape is concerned, I've been talking with some folks at the company I work for and all, and, we've never seen this before. So we're hoping that this will turn around, but it's going to be a lot longer than they expected.
The interesting thing too, and I think it's somewhat the unique situation, especially for all the airlines that are going to take the funding from the CARES Act, but it's like you almost have a 6-month. Everybody's going on hold for 6 months because we do anticipate some of the majors will probably furlough at some point. But we know for the airlines that take the money, that's probably not going to happen until October at least. So you almost do get a little bit of time to prepare. So I think that is a little bit unique.
Yeah. And with that said, from most of those, you can see that they can let up to like 10% go, that type of thing. But remember, we're in this for the long haul. I know you guys are probably not going to get out of this industry in the next 10 years. But if you leave the industry, coming back is going to be a lot more difficult to do. And all those jobs, and here's another thing that's unique, all those jobs, I used to work a lot in Turkey and China and Azerbaijan and trying to find people overseas. Those jobs aren't there. So a lot of people are calling me and say, hey, I'll just go to China. I was like, China? No, that's not going to happen. There's no hiring going on. So I think the problem is, there is momentum in our thoughts. There's momentum in everything. There's momentum of money. And sometimes we continue thinking in the old ways and we can't think of the new ways. Everything's changed. Now we got to think differently. That's all. Personally, I wouldn't get out of the industry. If you're young, first of all, if you're young and you're in college, I went through a recession while I was in college. You know what that meant? Cheaper beer. It really wasn't a big deal for me. I wasn't looking at life in that perspective because I was going to college. So continue what you're doing. I see so many young 20-year-old, 19-year-olds thinking, oh, I'm not going to do this. And I get it. Things have changed. I will say, here's something, and I won't give away anybody's names, but remember this. There's always a situation that's tougher than yours. And the one thing that I tell people during this furlough or during a downturn, the one thing you can do is start volunteering, because then you'll realize how good you have it. Get out there, help people, whether it's feeding people or helping other people with their careers, do that. But make sure you don't complain, because I was in a class once and I decided, because I was the furlough rep at one of the airlines I worked for. And I said, okay, I'm going to be the last person in the door. I'm going to be the last person to return from furlough, because I thought it looked better. And in that class, it was one individual who was complaining about he was on reserve for the past 2.5 years. Every other person in that class was on unemployment. And it was interesting because we finally turned around and said, do you realize you're the only person in this class that actually had a steady job during that period? And he kind of looked and his eyes got big and he realized, wow, maybe my situation wasn't that bad. And that's what I like to tell people, is reflect on your situation. You're still feeding yourself and you're still happy. And, I know there's some tough stories out there, but just be thankful for what you have and move forward. I think that's really important. And I think you guys do that too, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I think when you look at what's going on right now, you have to change your mindset as like, oh my God, I can't believe this happened. You have to look at times like this as a part of your career, because anybody that's in aviation long enough is going to see this stuff happen. And it is, and you have to plan for it financially and mentally and everything else. And you just have to know it's going to happen. Don't be surprised when it does happen. Dylan and I were preaching months ago, but like, yeah, things are going so good right now, but eventually what goes up must come down, and it does, and it will come back again, like you said. And so you just have to look at it as part of your career. Might be losing your job. That's just how it goes.
We've been recommending the book Hard Landing. I don't know if you've ever read that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been a long time
We've
since I read that.
Yeah, but for everybody, I think that should be required reading for all new hires at the airlines.
Most
and
definitely.
It's funny, a lot of our listeners we've been talking to are in this latest generation of flight students. It's been a pretty good situation for a while where they got into school, they became an instructor, they got hired at a regional pretty quickly, and then now this is like the first kind of dose of reality. And it's a kind of a welcome to the industry. I think.
And that's one thing that I've been discussing with people all along. So my background's in business. I used to own businesses before I got into aviation. And one of the things someone told me years ago is always double the time, double the money. And if you're saving, make sure you save twice as much. If you think a furlough might last 6 months, save for a year. I mean, that's kind of like what I do in my family. I have 2 years of actual savings in the bank just for something like this. And I'm pretty sure this will be done in 2 years. That's hard to do. That means that, you know what, you're not buying a fancy new car. I have an old car. I'm not buying a big house. The most important thing that I have is I have money for food and savings for what I'm doing. I know if you're starting out, that's tough to do, but just be prepared for that. And also when they say it's going to take 3 to 5 years to get to where you want to go, double that, say 6 to 10 years. And you'll be a lot happier that way. And also just kind of keep moving forward. And that's the biggest thing. And that's kind of what I tell people at the end of every one of the podcasts. So, but yeah, this too shall pass, but I want people to really remember this so they can tell other people and remember it yourself, because the worst thing you can do is when you upgrade to captain is buy that big house, the big car, but 5 Teslas in the driveway. That really is not a great idea.
Guys I fly with that like to say, yeah, I still live in my FO house. Yeah, that's what they didn't. A lot of these guys that are more conservative still live in their FO house. That's great.
Yeah, no, and that's kind of the way we are, and I think that's the way we should be. It's funny, and this is kind of a side, but it makes sense. I have a friend, and she's single, and she's looking for a boyfriend. I was like, well, I said, I could set you with a pilot. She says, what? A pilot? No way. They're the cheapest in the world. There's no way I'm going to want to go out with a pilot. And I said, you have to understand why. It's because it's a tough industry and we have a lot of downturns they have to save for. She didn't like the answer, but
that's pretty good. Yeah, that is one thing I wanted to touch on. Do you have any specific tips for these pilots that might be seeing that furlough potentially coming in the next couple of months, or maybe some of the corporate pilots that are thinking, man, could be getting closer and closer to a layoff here? Any specific financial tips for them?
Yeah, the first tip and the first advice I give is communicate with your family. That is actually the most important one, because sometimes we leave them out when we're talking finances. I know it's hard to do, but you got to tell them, listen, this is what might happen. So we need to start saving. We need to start cutting back. And I'm doing it. Like I'm not going to be flying next month. I've decided to take a leave. And so my income is going to go down dramatically. And so, going out to dinner, there's a lot of ways that you can save money. So the first thing I tell people is start saving money, from a financial perspective, is start looking at those things that really aren't necessary. I personally, in my life, most of what I do is discretionary income. I really don't need the little Piper Cherokee to go flying around in every day. I don't need to go out to dinner. Same thing with you, the listener. You're sitting there thinking, what could I do differently? Don't go out to dinner as much. I mean, that's a big part of what's been happening.
Easy right now.
Yeah, right. But delivery's expensive. And we started doing that a little too much. Oh my gosh. It's like, well, we can go to the same places. They'll just come to us. And it's like, oh, there's this fee tacked on. It's like, oh my gosh. And I know some of them are waiving those fees. The other thing too is hopefully you've prepared for this beforehand, and hopefully have, that saving, that emergency fund in the bank, and just save, be very careful with that emergency fund. This isn't really the time to start buying things unless you have a lot of extra cash, and that's basically in anything in investing. It's the same thing with anybody. It doesn't matter if you're a pilot or whatever. It's the biggest thing is saving. The other thing too is get your ducks in a row. Start working on your resume. Start working on everything else that you have. Your background check is important. Make sure you look at your last 10 years. I know it's difficult for some. I mean, I went through it after 9/11. I was losing my job every 6 months. So I had, my current airline, when I got interviewed, the guy said, well, what was the first airline you flew? And I said, well, I can't remember. Hang on a second. He says, you can't remember? I said, well, because for the first 4 years, I never did recurrent. I just did new hire training. And he's like, wow. So that's where you have to prepare. Keep yourself flying, keep in the ball. And that's hard to do sometimes, especially when it's, very depressing. And remember that you're not defined by your job. You're defined by who you are. And your family is the most important thing in supporting your family. You're a pilot, but you're also a person. And if you have to take another job, just hustle and do that. And I know one thing in every industry downturn, no matter what it's been in, I was in the computer industry, I was in international trade. Both of those industries had downturns, and when you're in the top 10%, you'll probably wind up getting a job. So put yourself in that top 10%. Get another rating if you can, study, etc. But yeah, the biggest thing is communicate, and then start cutting back now. Do it now. Don't wait till you get furloughed, because then you're in a habit pattern, right? And so if the furlough happens, you're already there, and it's tough to develop those habits sometimes. It really, I mean, I know lately, gosh, things have been so good. It's like, yeah, let's just go out to that steakhouse. It's not let's get another bottle of wine. Maybe you won't do that second bottle of wine. Maybe you'll just have, Miller Lite or something like that. So
$2 chuck. Yeah,
you got a $2 chuck. But as far as the industry in general, though, I think anybody who's been in this long enough realizes that car that gets you to the airport, it doesn't have to be a fancy car. All those type of things, and pay cash for stuff if you can. Not now, I get it, but there's a lot of things out there that people can look at and look towards for financial advice during this period. I'm not a financial counselor. I've done well financially, but not because anything other than the fact that I've saved my money and spent at least half of what I actually earn. And if you can get in that habit, like have that I love that. Keep the FO house. I think that's totally awesome. Keep the FO house that you had when you were an FO at a regional airline.
Exactly.
That's going to be a lot of savings right there.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I've used a couple tools. I will plug these guys. I don't get paid anything or anything like that, but I use something called You Need a Budget. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
Yeah, that's good.
Website, ynab.com. For us, it works great. It tracks all your expenses. You can categorize everything, and you can actually assign money to different things, so it helps you from overspending. But if somebody's struggling to set up a budget, that's a resource that I recommend. It's been really helpful for us.
On that note, another thing to do, and I know people are kind of adverse to this, is you can always do little envelopes and put cash in the envelopes and just pull out of those and only use the money in that bucket, for food or whatever, and don't steal from the other envelopes that are out there. It's a simple method. It's hard to do now because nobody uses cash, especially now, with Corona. You're not going to hand a cash to his cashier anymore. Exactly. Heck, I can't even hand him my credit card.
And that's actually what You Need a Budget is. I mean, it's kind of based off the Dave's Ramsey stuff, but it's essentially virtual envelopes. So you can take all your money in your account and be like, oh, okay, this is going to this and the utilities and the rent, but it's kind of the same principle, but you can use credit cards and everything else. But any of those types of tools, I think, are really useful.
So to plug two websites that I always give to people, there's Dave Ramsey and Ric Edelman. Those are the two big ones that I tell people to go towards. A little bit different philosophies, so you kind of look at those, but both of them will work really well for you, I think. And they also have all those tools, just like you were talking about. There's lots of them out there on the internet if you haven't already started a budget. So I agree with that. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Getting back to your point on having to take different jobs and kind of go backwards, Max and I both, I think we've told our stories a little bit before, but, we're out in Phoenix when the real estate bubble popped and we had that 2008, 2009. I've said it before. I went and taught driver's ed because that was the only job I could get. And it kind of kept me going for a little while. It wasn't a long-term thing, but it was something that worked. And Max stayed in aviation, but you had to make a big sacrifice.
Yeah, I went from flying the Gulfstream down to flying a beach jet again.
Serial number 1.
Oh, no.
Yeah, which was part of the preparation, though, is that I remember I was flying this Gulfstream, but I was maintaining dual currency. So I'd go back and do beach jet recurrent and take the PIC check for 135 and then go back and do Gulfstream just so I had, and that proved to be really valuable because when I lost my job on the Gulfstream, because I was flying for a real estate guy, this was in 2009, and then I was current and I was ready to go. And so they hired me on a beach jet and on the same certificate. So I already had it. So it was good. Some foresight there, trying to stay current, keep all your irons in the fire because you never knew what was going to happen.
Sure, sure. And we've all done that. I mean, I don't mention it a lot, but and not that I'm ashamed of it, but when I got furloughed, I became a reservation agent for Continental Airlines because I got furloughed for Continental Express and did that to keep all my benefits, et cetera. But you got to do something to keep moving. Actually, I made more money as a flight instructor. I was lucky. I was in an environment where there was a lot of money, and big cities are like that. So I went back to instructing, making a lot more money than as a reservation agent. But the funny thing is, back then, when I was actually an FO at the airline, I made more money as a res agent than as an airline pilot.
Hi, this is professional aviation broadcaster Carl Valeri. I'd like to take your ticket reservation. What city and state?
So to be transparent, I really stunk at being a reservation agent. I was horrible. I mean, I couldn't say, I'd be sitting there, you don't want a ticket? Okay, on to the next, have a great day. I wasn't pushy. Yeah. It's like, I really wasn't pushy enough. And there was people around me that were making tons more money than me. And I was like, well, if they don't want the ticket, then don't sell the ticket. A little bit to learn.
Can you really afford this? Really think through. Oh man!
But I learned a lot on that side of the business, which is kind of cool. Actually, I think it's neat for us to go and look at jobs that other people do, mechanics and dispatchers. And sometimes we get mad at the dispatchers. Why don't we sit there with them sometime, or sit with a reservation agent and find out what they really have to go through, that type of thing. But we've all done those jobs just to keep food on the table, and that's what you have to do. It's humbleness. You have to stay humble. I will say one thing. When I was a furlough rep for Continental Express, we had a lot of people that were offered jobs at Commute Air because they took a lot of our turboprop aircraft. And many of our pilots who actually got their first job in a jet said they wouldn't go to Commute Air because of the fact they were flying turboprops and they're a jet pilot. They don't fly props anymore. Well, what happened is, those people turned down those jobs. And about 6 months later, when we were supposed to recall at Continental Express, they didn't. They said, we're going to probably stay on furlough for another 6 months. Those same people came back and said, hey, can I have that job back? And that interview back? And I said, no, you've already turned it down. So don't look a gift horse in the mouth. If you are not flying, take a flying job. Is my biggest advice. And just remember, you're a pilot. It doesn't matter what you're flying. Just get out there and start flying. Sometimes, again, our egos get in our way a lot of times. And that's where you have to be humble, just fly whatever you can. I was happy flying a 172, anything I can, and get out there in the air just so you can keep current and keep flying.
Pilot egos, being humble. I don't know. You're not speaking my language.
I know. I know it's a very different personality in the cockpit, that's for sure. And we do have our egos. We're very outgoing people, and we do have we have a lot on our shoulders as far as responsibility. But I think part of it is built into our egos too. And realize also when you're flying, you can be replaced rather quickly. And I think people are starting to realize that. I think we got in a point where we felt that we deserve a certain job. I will say this: I've done for the airline I work for now. I've done a lot of interviews, and I'll have people sitting in the chair, leaning back, saying, "Okay, now what do you have for me?" And I was like, "Whoa, wait a minute! We're interviewing you for the job," and I understand you want to know, but it was as if like, "Hey, you're going to have to give me this job," because I have another job offer out there. So that changed. It just changed. But again, that's going back to being humble and remember, and anything in life, you can be replaced in a heartbeat. Remember this: as an airline pilot, you're going to be replaced within 2 to 3 hours, because that's as long as it takes to get another reserve in there. So that I always try to keep. That's how I keep humble myself. Is that if I didn't, they could just drag me out of the cockpit and have somebody else in here in a couple hours, just calling them off reserve. So with that, I will say though, that what you do is an incredibly important job, and always remember that. So what you need to do is think about, you're going to be flying those passengers someday, so you need to keep yourself current while you're out there, possibly on furlough. We're not really seeing a lot of furloughs right now, and I think this is an important point, if you don't mind me making this point right now, is furlough mitigation has been going on for a little while now. So we're seeing a lot of people getting leaves of absence. Look at me, I'm taking a leave of absence for a month. I'm doing month to month. There's people that are actually taking, you can call it permanent leaves of absence. Some people call it early retirement. It all depends on how it's negotiated with your airline. And people say, well, what's the difference? A permanent leave of absence, basically you're still an employee of the airline, so you get all the benefits. You don't jump seat because you're not current, but you're not actually retired. And there's a big difference. And it all depends on your airline. It depends on your job. For the corporate pilots out there, same thing. It's you could get furloughed from a corporate job, but you also normally you'll get laid off from a corporate job. And those jobs, the one cool thing about private flying is being able to jump from one job to the next and make a fairly similar amount of money. But if you're an airline pilot, you'll just go right to the bottom of the list. Interestingly, when one of the airlines I went to work for while I was on furlough, I worked for like 3 or 4 airlines. The one I went to work for, SkyWest, actually, my class average had 8,000 hours. And I was one of the few people that didn't have heavy time. I mean, everybody else was 767s, 737s. I was one of the few folks that actually had just got off an Embraer 120 and I had turboprop time, and that's it. When I asked those people why they went to the regional, they all said it's because they want to stay current and they want to stay within the industry. And I said, wow, that's a really good idea. So, just looking at that, that's why I tell people, listen, if you're a major pilot, you might have to go back to a regional, et cetera. So right now, though, it's tough. I mean, I get it, but this too shall pass. It's just we need to keep our heads up during the whole process. That's for sure. It's hard to do sometimes.
I wanted to touch on something you mentioned in your podcast in the latest episode, which I just listened to, which was excellent. You really went into breaking down the furloughs. As you said, you were a union rep, furlough rep, so you got a really intimate understanding of it. But what you said was, if you get furloughed, one, whatever time they tell you, it's probably going to be longer than that. Yeah. And two, don't wait around and say, well, it's only going to be 6 months, so I'll just take a little vacation and, I'll wait and then I'll get recalled. Can you talk a little bit more about the mindset that people should have when they get laid off or furloughed?
So going back to what I said before, always double the time, double the money, and that's in business. So whenever they say it's going to be 6 months, it might be a year. If it's going to be 3 months, it might be longer. I just talked to someone, I said before, that they said it was going to be 2 months. It's probably going to be more like 10 months. So that mindset should be there as far as the length of time. What that does is it makes your decision a little bit different when you're looking at other jobs. Remember, when you're on furlough, most agreements, you are allowed to actually go work for somebody else unless sometimes they're paying you on furlough. There are some of the things that some people out there have been paid during furlough and then they couldn't get another job, or they're being paid during furlough and can get another job. So make sure you look at that first. So that's really, really important. But the other thing too, and this isn't anything in life, is never let the grass grow below your feet. You need to actually get out there and continue to look for a job. So that goes along with what I said is, keep moving and don't stop. In other words, if you just got furloughed and said, oh yeah, I'll get recalled in 6 months, I'm going to hang out, I don't know, I'm going to cook some hot dogs on the grill, drink some beer by the pool. Not a great idea. And it happens. And it's great if you can do that and you're close to retirement like me. I could maybe do that. I mean, we might just be able to afford hot dogs and beer and that's it. But if I retire right now. But one of the most important things, though, is that if you don't have a CFI, maybe it's time to get that CFI. If you don't have your double I, maybe it's time to get the double I. If there's an opportunity out there for you to get a rating, go for it. And another thing, too, as far as when you go on furlough, you collect unemployment benefits where you live most of the time. So make sure you look at those state benefits, because I got stuck with this, and a lot of people did, where they changed their residency right after furlough and they no longer were eligible for benefits because I was in the state of Texas, I think, at the time as my residency, and changed it to Florida. I lost out on getting a 737 type rating, which a lot of people did during the furlough. There's a lot of money out there that's available so that you can actually get help with moving forward in your career. And that depends on what you do and where you stay. I was working with someone last night and said, hey, the state that this person was in, she could actually get their first year of college paid for because she didn't have any college. So, and she's not stopping. So again, don't stop. I mean, go forward, because now, at one point we really didn't need to worry too much about 4-year degrees, but now we're looking at that again. So things are going to get more competitive once things start up again. So I think that's the point I was trying to make is if you think you're going to be on furlough for 6 months, plan for 12. If you're going to sit around and do nothing, that's not a good idea. If you want to stay with this career, keep current, get on simulator, go out, fly with your friends, join a club, tell your friends that own an airplane that you'll fly with them and they can go under the hood and then you can go under the hood, whatever it may be. It's be creative, think outside the box, do some guerrilla flying out there. It's like guerrilla marketing. You want to get out there and just keep finding stuff. So that's the biggest thing I want to push forward is don't ever stop.
So I have a question. So you always hear people throw around this break-even point on furloughing pilots that the airlines have, whereas it actually costs more if you don't furlough long enough, right? And given that we don't really know what's going to happen here. I mean, obviously the virus will fizzle out here at some point, but how long lasting the effects of all of this will be is the real question. So do you have any insight into what that is, that kind of break-even time?
Yeah, usually it's about 6 months, and that has to do with the airline's contracts. Because most of the contracts, if they're going to furlough you, they have to give you, for every year that you're employed, they have to give you usually a month of pay. Up to about 6 to 7 years, you get credit for 1 month. So if you're going to be furloughed for less than 6 months, it's not worth it. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Because you really don't want to do that. Plus, the other thing, and I was able, when I was at the airline, to negotiate reduce flying lines down to 20 hours and 10-hour lines. And why is that? If they really feel this thing's going to come back in the manner that they are anticipating, then they have what's called a scalable workforce. You don't have to go hire somebody else. You have them there. They're flying 20 hours. You tell them, now you got to fly 40 hours. Now you got to fly 80 hours. So that's a benefit there. But usually, as far as a straight furlough, it's usually about 6 months. If they think it's going to be more than 6 months, you're probably going to get furloughed. Now, I don't want to be too negative here, though. Remember this, that a lot of the furlough mitigation that we talked about that's going through, we're seeing a lot more people want to take that than's available. So that says that's something good. And we've seen this in the numbers out there in the economy in general. People have been saving their money and they really want to retire. I'm in a very senior base with the airline I work for, and the people I fly with, they all want to retire. I mean, they're like, hey, I hope they have an early retirement. And my message to those that are listening right now, please do, so I can move up on the seniority list.
That's the best case scenario for those of us that are junior at the airline, is if they, and also, and a lot of times for the airline too, really to get, because those guys are the most costly. So,
and the American, what did they have? Like 620 guys take the early out, I think.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Something like that, and maybe oversubscribed. I'm not sure, but
that's a chunk of guys, man. That's
Yeah,
it is, and you remember those are expensive people too that they're getting rid of. You know, those are people at the high end of the pay scale, so they can replace them with people that are paying a little bit less, and that helps a little bit there. But remember too that you have to you really, if you've been employed anybody, there's expenses involved with somebody who's on unemployment. It's like I've had people on unemployment in my job or my business, and I have to pay some benefits out for a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
So that's the cost right there too, and just hiring people, bringing them back, training, et cetera, that can be a real hassle there. That's another thing too, that when you look at these leaves of absences, the reason you see some people that are getting denied, and you'll hear this out there, is I got denied for currency. I was like, what does that mean? Well, that means that if they saw that you were going to go beyond your currency for landings, training, whatever it may be, they may deny, they say that 6 month, temporary leave of absence, and say, no, you can't do it. You have to only go for 3 months. That you're seeing quite a bit actually with the different airlines. So that's a good thing. Some hope right there is that there are a lot of people that do want to take a leave. I mean, for me, I want to take a leave because I'm just swamped with, obviously with the coaching and stuff like that because of what's happening right now. But there's a lot of other people out there that are like that. They want to do other things. And, I saved a little cash and I go play with my little Cherokee. Actually, is another thing I'm going to do during the furlough or during this downturn. Excuse me.
So, what can you tell? Can you just kind of explain how recall rights work?
That's a great question. Yeah, because that is the other side of things. So we talk about furlough, but the most important thing is recall. And what does that mean? Well, when they furlough people, it's actually what's called last in, first out. So they're going to be the ones, the last that was in is going to be the first out. So they go from the bottom, in other words. So if you're on the bottom of the seniority list, you're going to go out. Right. So as they go through the list, they furlough, say you have 1,000 pilots, they furlough 500. Then at some point, the airline needs you. And they need to recall those pilots back to work. Different airlines have different recall rights. And so there's a lot that's in the recall rights. So I'll go into that. Basically, when you're recalled, it's them telling you, hey, you got to come back to work. And do you want to come back to work? And they start at the top of that seniority list from the people that were furloughed. So you're at the top of the seniority list of the people that are furloughed. You're that one at the top. And you say, you know what? Is there anything I can do? I really don't want to come back to work. I'm flying this corporate gig. Like, sure, you can bypass recall, and it's called bypass recall. So you can actually say, I don't want to get recalled right now, and just call me back whenever you have another recall. So what they normally do is they'll go all the way down the list to the most junior person and ask that person, do you want to be recalled, right? And so once they hit the bottom of that list, they start back up the list and say, okay, this is your last chance. So usually that's a normal one. There's other stipulations too, but normally you go down to the bottom. If they've gone through everybody for recall, then they come back up the list again. The second time they come up, you have to say yes or no, or else you're now on the street and you don't have any recall rights. And then they go all the way up to the top. And then the last person comes back to the job that they had. And those recalls can last for 10 years. Now, wait a minute. How can that last 10 years if they're hiring during a furlough or during a recall? Well, here's a little something that happens with some airlines. So normally they furlough from the bottom up and they recall from the top down. And once they go through all the bypasses, they're like, okay, you have to come back to work. But they make some special deals with people. And they say, okay, if you want to stay on furlough, we'll let you stay on furlough. You're not going to have any longevity accrued, but you can stay on furlough if you like. And people have done that. I know people have gotten degrees. I know one guy got an MBA and then got a law degree by bypassing recall, just through a special deal that they made with the company and said, hey, this is what we're going to do. But the recall rights are incredibly important. I know that was kind of complex, but just remember that once you get furloughed, you still have to look at your recall rights on that list and make sure that you have the ability to be recalled for a certain number of years. That's the other thing too, is your recall, is it forever? Is it for 10 years? Is it for 5 years? Most people that bypass in most contracts, it's 5 or 10 years. It could be for the life of the company, and that's quite important. So one of the things that I think that we don't realize is there are a lot of people doing other things besides flying. So, I know one guy's a dentist, and he said, hey, listen, I want to be on furlough for a lot longer. So that's why you call that, it's called recall rights. The other thing too, that when we use that term furlough, there's people from other industries. Furlough is a leave of absence. But remember, furlough in the airline industry is an involuntary leave of absence in our context. The other things that we do are COLAs and stuff like that. So that's why the recall rights are important during a furlough. It's not a voluntary leave of absence. It's an involuntary leave of absence. So hopefully that explains, we go from the top down, when we recall them, and go from the bottom of the senior list up when we furlough. So if you're number 1,000 on the list and they're facing a recall, you better be ready for that.
One other thing at an airline I was at, we actually did first a voluntary furlough. So they let people actually sign up, the people that, like you said, maybe they're a dentist or they got something else on the side. And so before they did the mandatory, they let some people bid on it. But again, every contract's a little bit different, I guess.
Most of the contracts, instead of calling it a voluntary furlough, they call it a COLA, company offered leave of absence. And you have to look at your contract, because in most jobs, you will see a voluntary furlough in most contracts. Airlines traditionally have not been using that term, but there are some contracts. We have it in our contract, but in reality, we do COLAs first, and then there is no such thing as an involuntary furlough, because we already went through the voluntary furloughs through the COLAs. So.
I did it twice at my airline.
I remember that.
2 5-year leaves of absence.
That's awesome.
Worked out great. So, and somebody got to keep a job, and I got to go teach driver's ed. So it was, it's perfect.
What was more exciting, driver's ed or flight instructing?
Oh man. Well, I mean, the flight students were a little bit older, at least. So at least they were in college.
Good point. Good point.
Young, but you don't have a break in an airplane, and at least you do in the car. So I don't know.
That's true.
It's 50-50. But I used to have a full head of hair before I did driver's ed.
Yeah, mine wasn't gray when I was before flight instructing.
So far, Carl, you've provided a lot of great information, factual information, but I want to get into a little bit of maybe reckless speculation for a minute. I'm not going to put you on the spot or anything, but it's something interesting to discuss. So in one of the previous episodes, James O'Neill was on, we talked about force majeure and some of that language in contracts. And I've started to think about what's going to happen in the future. Everybody's reality changed a little bit after 9/11. We've just changed the way we operate, with security and other procedures. And it's likely that might happen again. Some people have speculated that things might permanently change after we get through this crisis. But what I was thinking about is, let's say we get through this current pandemic, things are starting on the uptick. What happens in 2 or 3 years when there's another virus that will eventually, break out, as they do every few years? It seems like there's a potential for a much quicker pullback and reduction in international flying and things. Have you discussed that or thought about that at all?
Yeah, I have. And the one thing that I feel is a lot different with this one is the fact, unlike a SARS that we had in the bird flu, in Spanish flu even, we can go back, but the SARS and bird flu is that there was a part of that where we could actually control it. This, it seems like we can't control. We have, no matter what, you don't have enough protocols, and you always have to change with the times. So I think that we do have in place some, and they're already thinking about this as far as what to do in the next pandemic, but we've had these before and they thought that the procedures they had worked, but they've never seen something like this that spreads so quickly. So yeah, as far as changing, it's going to definitely change. It's going to change permanently. I mean, when after 9/11, we never looked at the person next to us as a possibility of somebody that could actually harm us. And now we do that. And that changed our outlook on things quite a bit. We actually, I think even with the airlines, are going to start looking at things from a cleanliness standpoint and looking at what we're doing, wiping things down, et cetera, how we clean the airplanes, et cetera. So definitely that'll change there. But as far as what that means to an airline, it means a higher expense. And you'll see a little bit of change in that manner. Will they ask you, have you ever had the flu before you get hired with an airline? I don't think that it's going to go that far.
Take your temperature.
Check your temperature, yeah.
Yeah, on the way into the interview. No, I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, yeah, for sure. And what's interesting too is that a lot of the big airlines are up for contract negotiations either right now or very, very soon, and so this might add another aspect to that negotiation from the company side or even the pilot side. Who knows? Just to give some sort of accommodation when or if this happens again.
They can always use bankruptcy to change the rules too. I mean, that's pretty simple. And we've seen that happen in the past. And, heck, the company I was working for was owned by a guy named Frank Lorenzo. And he really changed things using bankruptcies. And it's interesting because of the fact that we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And by changing this landscape, we've already, you're hearing the brace from the CEOs, right? Hey, we're going to have to cut pay. This is coming. And part of the deal is that we may have to take some reduction in pay and afterwards. I mean, the deal's only good for a certain number of months, et cetera. So you're starting to hear that already. It happens on every downturn. I mean, it really does. And so I don't think, as far as speculating what's going to happen, it's not going to be the same as it was before. But I think every CEO has been saying that. Everybody's been saying we're coming out the other end as a different airline. And honestly, during the last downturn, I think it was for the better. You saw airlines actually saving money, putting money in the bank. And now, especially the folks I work for, I'm a lot happier because they have some cash in the bank. Much different story than years ago, although the burn rate is just astronomical. Never seen anything like this as far as burn rate on cash. There's just so long you can go without help. And even with the help, they're still burning cash after the help.
Sure.
So it's going to be just phenomenal there. But hopefully I answered your question as far as speculating.
I don't think there is an answer. It's just, for me, I've just been thinking like, wow, next contract, what if there are terms in there, more specific force majeure terms, especially for international flying or something that says, look, if there's I feel like the next potential pandemic, we're going to overreact. That's just my guess. Yeah. It's like, oh, something's happening in China. Boom, pull all the flights, right away. I could just see that scenario happening maybe next time. And maybe there being contract language in there that says, look, if something like this happens again, we've got to have a better way of dealing with all of these situations. Because you get to a huge airline like United or American, furloughing causes so many crazy training cycles and rebidding equipment and stuff. I mean, the shockwaves are just felt through the whole group. So I wonder if they're going to try and figure out a way to mitigate that.
Yeah, the one way they do that is, training out of order. They can do that, and they can do that, and they've done it at every airline. It's like, hey, we're going to freeze you on this piece of equipment. You should hold captain, but you're not going to. And you're a captain, and you're going to stay on the equipment you have, even though you wanted to move to another piece of equipment. But yeah, but the play devil's advocate on that, if we look at the fact that I think we actually underestimated this and we underreacted to this because of SARS and those things. So that would be the other side of this. We may actually come out the other end of this. And remember, time actually changes our thoughts about the past, and one of the things that may happen, we may say, hey, that really wasn't that bad. And if the number of deaths or whatever are less than, say, the flu, then we might say, hey, it really wasn't that bad. But remember this, we all are sitting in our homes locked down. We didn't have that during SARS. It was basically crossing the border. So we kind of, in our minds, psychologically, our past starts to look different. It's just like how you remember your family, your friends, and that's just what we do. And we do it to save ourselves too, psychologically. And that, honestly, I think that's a bigger toll on this, is the psychology of it. And it's tough. I mean, I called my brother, and I was up in New Jersey. That's where I'm from. And there's number 2 just died, at work. And that's really, psychologically, that's tough. It's his secretary's mom passed away of COVID. And then his, another coworker, they have COVID and they died. And so it's tough. I mean, that right there, when you come back to work and see the empty chair, psychologically, that's a hard thing to go through. So I think what we do, though, to protect ourselves is we compartmentalize it, and that, as we should, so that we can protect ourselves psychologically. And so we may underreact. So that's the devil's advocate's version of it.
Yeah, but what happens is you saw countries like Taiwan and South Korea that were hit hard with SARS, and the way they've reacted has become kind of the model of how we should do it next time. And so hopefully we'll do that, and we'll learn from this experience and learn how to react quicker and with the most effectiveness to then shorten the duration in which it disrupts everything. So I think that's the silver lining on it, I guess.
I did not like taking my shoes off every time I went through the border, though. That was a pain, walking across all those mats of alcohol. So especially going to Canada and back, that type of thing. But yeah, it's and again, the most important thing we have to realize is that we have each other to lean on and to help. We have these podcasts like yours and everybody else out there to help us through this and realize, hey, this has happened before if you're someone's never been in this industry. And that's why I think more and more people are listening to podcasts, and they're looking towards the internet, and they're looking towards their friends and family, because that is really the most important thing is your friends, your family, et cetera. Remember, you weren't always a pilot, but you always had your family. And that's what we need to turn towards in these type of trying times, and your friends. That's really, really important, I think.
Yeah, that's good advice.
That is a perfect soundbite we can chop up and put it on a t-shirt. I think. It is great advice. Well, let's shift gears to something a little bit more positive, Carl. Every episode that we like to wrap up, we always give our guests an opportunity to tell a funny or interesting aviation story. Just curious if you've got a good one for us.
Oh gosh, yeah. There's this one that so remember, I'm a male, and so from my perspective, when I hear certain things, even though I try not to look at anybody in a different light, sometimes it happens. So I'm on a flight going from, I think it was Tampa to Newark, and the flight attendant calls and says, hey, we've got this pig back here and it's really causing a lot of problems. And I say, well, just tell him to sit down and get back to me, and then click, right? And I turn off the intercom. And so I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, who is this jerk, that's causing all these problems? And she sounded a little distressed, and it was kind of odd. So I get a ring, and she says, listen, this pig is really causing a lot of problems. He's just tearing up things. And I was like, oh, it's getting out of hand. And, tell him to sit down. She goes, no, I think you don't understand. There's a pig, like a piglet, running up and down the aisle and is tearing through everything. And I said, oh my God, you mean a pig? She says, yes, I've been trying to tell you there's a pig in the back of the airplane. I was like, I thought you meant a guy who was acting like a pig. I didn't realize that was what you meant. And she's like, yes. I said, what do we do? I said, well, we're not supposed to have pigs on board. She goes, of course we're not supposed to have pigs on board. That's what I'm trying to tell you. What do you want us to do? So finally I said to her, I'm sorry. You just really threw me off. I said, I tell you what, can you get it under control, or find someone to get it under control, and we'll land and we'll have a talk with the passenger on the ground. She goes, sure. So she calls me back and she's laughing. She says, you really had no idea that there was a real pig running up and down the aisle, did you? I said, no, I'm thinking it was some guy who was being a pig and doing something to you. And she's like, no, that's not what I meant. And I was so embarrassed. I'm turning red now. You can see on the video. It was just, that was like such an embarrassing moment. And she still looks at me to this day and says, she shakes her head. Oh my gosh. And again, it looked at it from my perspective, I have a different viewpoint. But yeah, the pig running up and down the aisle was not a guy running up and down the aisle being a jerk. It was actually a real pig running up and down the aisle.
Now is that in the ops manual or in the QRH, or did you have to go?
Oh my God! What do we do? It's like when you get on board and you have a parrot. Where does it say you can't have a parrot? Now we have rules that we don't have parrots.
Did the person smuggle the pig on, or was it like an emotional support animal, or what?
It was actually a pet in a carrier, and it was in a carrier, and the person, I guess, pigs kind of, they're a brownish, dark brown. They could almost look like a cat or a dog. Maybe, I guess. Maybe may not, but still, I could see how possibly it would get past a gate agent. And I'm like, that was the next thing we asked. How did it get past a gate agent? She says, oh no, this is my dog. And they're like, okay. I mean, they have a little tail. It could be almost like a fat chihuahua. I don't know.
I just wonder, how did it get out? And then it's just running.
I didn't go there. It was just like, it was just so embarrassing for me to not figure out that. And it took so long for me to figure there was a real pig on board. And, she's like, no, a squealing pig. I was like, oh my God. And so the communication breakdown was there because of my viewpoint, and my paradigm had to shift after that one. So, the term pig could mean a real pig.
That's funny.
How many pigs will fly jokes? Yeah. Where did you guys get out of
that? Oh, Carl, I know you're the announcer there at Sun and Fun, and I guess we just found. Can you guys tell us what's going on with that? Has been.
Yeah, I'm glad you said something. Yeah. So we just put out a video, and on my one website and on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/expertaviator, there's a video there that explains everything that's happening. We've canceled the show. It's not going to happen until next year. And remember that this show raises about $2 million for the operations there at Sun and Fun. Jeez. And what do they do with that money? They give that away in scholarships in STEM. They also do outreach programs with kids. They go around and talk to all sorts of people about aviation careers, but also getting them into aviation in general. They have the largest high school aviation club, flying club in the country. They have actual live 727 that they actually get to use. But those things cost money. They give away scholarships, and they have the air show all year. They have different events all year long. They have camps, so they have to pay for all that, and they have employees. Well, now that this has happened, basically they're going to go back to where they were before John Leanhouse took over Sun and Fun, and they're going back into debt. They're down, but they're not out. That's for sure. So in the video, I explain that if you have tickets to Sun and Fun, that they will honor those tickets next year. So just remember that. What we're asking people to do is, if you have the ability to maybe donate your tickets and buy another set next year, or possibly, if you look at flysnf.org, you'll find a donate button. And if you were going to spend $10, $50, $100 at Sun and Fun, which you normally would do anyway, maybe you could donate and help continue these programs that go throughout the whole year. I mean, Sun and Fun they have all sorts of stuff and outreach throughout the country, not just within Lakeland. So they do a lot more. It's actually ACE, the Aerospace Center for Excellence. Sun and Fun is actually just the air show. And they also do other things too. They do things throughout the year, and they have events, and you can actually rent their facilities. And, I coached the flight team at Polk State College, and we actually used their facilities for the actual regional competition we had. And that was great. So if you're thinking about having an event, you want to fly people in to, just have a convention after this is all over, obviously, think about using Sun and Fun, because they definitely could use the funds. But just remember this, that we are still honoring the tickets for those people that have purchased tickets. They will honor them for next year. We're just asking people if maybe they think about a donation or donating their tickets. They could even contact Sun and Fun if you're looking to use that donation as a tax write-off. Some people will have that opportunity to do that. But we're excited for next year. Don't forget, if you really want to listen to some of those interviews, all year long we stream them on liveatc.net/SNF. Real easy to find. If you look up Lakeland Airport on Live ATC, you can stream all those interviews that we do, both with the WASPs. We also have interviews with many different famous pilots and air show performers. We have Geico that's out there that we interview. We have the Tuskegee Airmen that are on there. And many of the past interviews of the WASPs and Tuskegee Airmen we keep on there because some of them aren't with us anymore. And so it's inspiring to hear them and listen to them. And it's quite interesting. And I can't plug it enough. I have one interview that keeps playing year after year that I did with a young lady. I call her young lady. She was actually one of the WASP, Women Air Force Service Pilots. And she was actually flying during World War II. And I asked her what she flew. And she said, multi-engine aircraft. I said, which one? She said, all of them. And I said, wow. I said, even the B-29? And she goes, yeah. And I said, oh, wow. Where'd you get to fly that? He says, well, this gentleman named Colonel Tibbetts asked me to fly with him and do some demos. I said, you mean General Tibbetts, dropped the bomb? And she says, yeah, that's the guy. And I was like, wow. And she was such a humble individual. But when we talked about her life as a pilot and her life, being a female and being a flight instructor and running a business, it was just so inspirational. And that's just one of the many stories that are out there of all these incredible air show performers that are out there. Jerry Jive Kirby. We also, Patty Wagstaff. We have many different performers that talk about their life, and Lee Lauterbach. I mean, just there's all sorts of really great people that we get to talk to, and they are very inspirational. And those messages, I think, are good to hear right now. That's for sure. But Sun and Fun still, we're going forward. Don't give up on us now. A lot of the projects we had going, like the expansion at the museum, that's going to be put on hold, obviously. And some of these other projects we were looking at, we're just trying to regroup right now. So don't give up on us. Check us out, flysnf.org. That's for sure.
Well, I think I speak for a lot of us to say, man, next year, I think for all these types of events, I think the crowds will be even bigger and more energized and excited. So it will be exciting when these shows do return. So thank you for the update on that. Carl, if people want to get a hold of you, check out your podcasts, YouTube, can you give them all the information? We'll obviously have all the links in our show notes.
The easiest way to find me is my original website that I started. It's called expertaviator.com. That's my blog. It's also where you find everything from my podcast episodes on Aviation Careers Podcast, Stuck Mike AvCast, a YouTube channel. It's all right there. Just expertaviator.com. All the links are available from there. I know I talk about Aviation Careers Podcast mostly because that's where we've been the busiest over the years. But I'd love to talk to you. If I can't get back to you right away, one of my crew does. And it's something that for me and for you guys also is really important that, we continue our passion for aviation and we continue to inspire people to reach for their dreams and keep flying and moving forward in their careers and in their lives in general. And so hats off to you guys. I think you guys are doing a wonderful job with this, and I love the podcast.
I appreciate
Thanks, Carl.
Thank you. And can't wait to hear another episode of 21.5 Podcast.
All right. We'll talk to you soon. Well, Dylan, on the phone today, we have our good friend over at Harvey Watt, Rob Alston, who's calling in to talk about a couple of different things in the insurance realm that professional pilots should be aware of. Welcome back, Rob.
Hey, guys. How are y'all doing?
We're hanging in there.
That's right.
So what's new?
Oh, man. Exactly. Yeah. Nothing to talk about on the podcast these days.
Not much.
Yeah,
not much.
Right. So, Rob, it's been a crazy time in the industry. We've talked about pilots taking leaves, potentially furloughs, all sorts of big decisions that pilots are going to be making in the coming weeks and months. And just thought you might have some insight on some of the things that they should be considering when they're looking at these different options and some of the effects that they could have.
So I'm speaking specifically on your disability loss of license insurance.
Okay.
And your life insurance as well. And I'm also talking about the U.S. insurers. There's international carriers that don't have to meet those solvency requirements, and they write all kinds of wild policies that we don't offer just because you can't risk your name and reputation offering a plan that is backed up by rich families owning castles.
That's a good point.
Not an exaggeration.
Okay. Sounds like another good story.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that it's important that pilots are aware that, whether you find yourself facing a leave of absence, a furlough, or even a termination. I wanted to touch on a couple things. The first is if your insurance, when you purchase insurance, it's important that you're aware or know that you have the peace of mind that a portion of your premium actually goes into what they call a state guarantee fund. And that fund is guaranteeing that even if your employer goes out of business, your union goes out of business, or you no longer have a job to go back to, whether it's because you've been out too long or whatever happens, even if the insurance company is unable to meet their financial obligations to pay you their claim, a portion of your premium goes into a state guarantee pool that's actually that when the state approves it, they've reviewed the financials, made sure that the financials of the company are sound, the policy is written fair, and that they would be in a position to step in to make sure that your claim is paid. So you do have that type of peace of mind. We've been fielding those calls quite frequently from pilots. So you don't need to worry about the solvency of the insurance that you may have. Either it's an employer provided option or a voluntary plan that we administer for you.
Let's say you get your life insurance through your employer and it does look like there could be a furlough. I mean, is it pretty standard, the language at most carriers, or is every situation going to be different, or how does that all work?
So the most standard group term life insurance language will carry a two-prong eligibility. Is one that you're active and in good standing with the plan sponsor. So if you bought it through your union, that would be your union. If you bought it through your airline or your employer, that would be the employer. The other portion of eligibility is that you're active at work. And so plans will oftentimes can carry a continuance provision in the event that you go on an approved leave of absence. Typically that can be 30 or 60 days, or we're seeing in some situations where they're actually able to liberalize that a little bit more. And it's important that pilots know that if you do take a leave of absence, that you the pilot, and your spouse's coverage. So say you buy life insurance on yourself, or you buy disability insurance on yourself, or you buy life insurance on your spouse, that can be contingent upon you meeting those eligibility requirements. And so with many airlines out there, the unions will actually, help educate the pilots that, hey, the insurance you get from the employer may be pretty inexpensive, but if you were to become disabled or go on a long-term leave of absence, you can lose that eligibility to keep that coverage. And so you and your spouse can lose the eligibility for that group plan. You might be able to port it to an individual plan, but that's based on your current set of circumstances, and it's not going to be at the same rate and terms. And so it's important pilots know that. I will say that if you have life insurance through us, our plans are designed so that they're not vulnerable to any of those changes. So if your health deteriorates, your relationship with your employer or union deteriorate or any of that, it wouldn't affect what you're paying for your coverage. You'll be able to keep your coverage unaffected.
So it seems like every pilot's going to have to do a little bit of digging with their individual policy then, huh?
Yeah. I mean, this would be, frankly, this could be 300 separate conversations to be had, but it's something that people don't think about when they're looking at some of these different options. I mean, some of these companies are offering, everything from, vacation pay forward and, where they're trying to push it so you take vacation today to a rolling, furlough or leave of absence or any of that. But keep in mind, don't forget about your benefits and how they could be affected. Like I mentioned, with many of these plans, they'll have a continuance provision. Or, for example, if you go out on a leave of absence for a certain period of time, if you did lose your medical certificate, you could still qualify for a claim. With some airlines, your coverage won't be interrupted at all, and so even if you are out on this leave of absence or you've reduced your hours, or you'll still have the option there. Should you get hit with a medical certification issue, that claim would also be covered. But we've been fielding a lot of these calls, and I wanted to make sure that your listeners were aware of that. We're here as always to help out, and we're familiar with the different plans. And if we don't know the answers, we can certainly get them for you. But unfortunately, it's a conversation we're having many times a day.
Well, that's super important information. Thanks, Rob. If you get that notice of furlough or whatever, or you're going to take that long-term leave, a lot of times that'd be the furthest from your mind, I think, or easy to go by the wayside. So thanks for bringing it to the forefront for our listeners, and hopefully it'll be useful to somebody for sure.
I had another question for you too, with a lot, especially in like corporate. I'm thinking about in the side of the industry I'm on. What if I get laid off and I have to switch employers? I've got an insurance plan. Can that sometimes transfer, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's a good question. So all of our plans are designed so that they can be portable. So whether you've purchased a life insurance policy for you or your spouse, or a disability loss of license policy, it's designed so that you can carry it with you if you have a change in employers, unions, or even health, so that you'll be able to enjoy that continuity of coverage with that. And so that's very unique, especially with group life insurance, that we've been able to design the plan so that you're insulated from those types of changes. And especially in the economy that we're facing right now, and with the COVID-related furloughs, that's absolutely critical, because you don't enjoy that through employer or other union-sponsored plans.
Okay. And one other question. A lot of the people that I know locally were able to negotiate loss of medical insurance into their compensation plan, and now maybe they're going to be switching jobs. If you've had your employer paying that and you're switching to a new employer that's going to also pay for it, is it a new thing that you enroll, or how does that work?
So you'll be able to keep it. It's unique to the specific plan and how we structure it. Mm-hmm. With the majority of the plans, it'll just continue uninterrupted. And basically, we would just coordinate with you, the individual airman, and your employer on how to adjust the billing.
Well, that's actually pretty easy then, huh?
And if that applies too, if you go from a corporate to one of the legacy carriers, because we've got payroll deduction set up with all them. Okay. So that it can be you can rely only on the coverage that you have through your airline, mm-hmm. or you can use a variation of the plan that you may have purchased or may have had purchased for you as a corporate pilot to supplement what the airline provides. Oh. And so they set up payroll deduction, and we're the only ones that have payroll deduction at those airlines, because the airlines want to make it as easy for the pilots to purchase supplemental coverage to pay in addition to what they may get from their company.
Okay. Oh, it's good to know. So just because you might be switching employers, it doesn't mean you have to lose the coverage then.
Absolutely.
What's on the aero medical services side, are you doing any work in the COVID realm? Are pilots calling about that? Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, we administer these plans for about 73,000 pilots, and we've actually set up where we're tracking them all for the airlines. We talked to the federal air surgeon today about it. They're looking at tracking as well. Everybody's looking at it. We've got a team set up just to track all these cases. They're spiking up all over, unfortunately. We had a couple cases actually where one in which a pilot actually contracted in China and was able to get evacuated over to Hong Kong.
Oh, wow.
Wouldn't want to be stuck there.
Holy cow.
Away from your family.
Yeah, this is definitely uncharted territory we're getting into. I mean, I just don't know what the next thing's going to be. Well, Rob, we certainly appreciate you taking the time to give us a little update and a little food for thought there. And if folks have questions about insurance and they want to get a hold of Harvey Watt, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can email pilot@harveywatt.com. And if they tell us who they work for, we have different teams set up for each of the airlines. And so we can forward them over and have the correct person that works on their account and that's familiar with their different plan options and offerings. Call them back.
Good deal.
Perfect. Thanks, Rob.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Rob Alston, and thanks to our sponsor, Harvey Watt.
Thanks to Carl Valeri. All of his contact information is in the show notes. And thanks to our listeners for sticking around for episode 31. Hey, dude, we've been doing this about a year. Can you believe it?
Jeez. Is that right?
Yeah.
Seems like 2. It's incredible.
I know. Definitely. Dude, the last month seems like a year. So,
well, let me do some quick math here. If we are on episode 31, we release them once every 2 weeks. There's 52 weeks in the year.
Mm-hmm. It's because you'll remember in March we released like 6 episodes in the span of 2 weeks.
Oh, okay.
Remember we had all those emergency episodes?
Yeah, that's true. All right.
Which we might have to have some more of soon if more announcements come down the pipe. So,
yeah. All right.
Yeah. Look forward to those. All right. Well, that's going to do it for episode 31. We'll see you guys in a couple of weeks. But until then,
flexibility is the key to air power.
See you guys.
Rock on.